Welcome to Request for Inspection. Sit back, relax, and concentrate, as the coming crime recap is not for the faint-hearted. Meet Dhirendra Singh, a journalist who went missing in December 2000. He was supposed to reach his village named Bari that day, which was roughly a 3-hour drive from Prayagraj, where he had moved for work. Back in the village, his brother Virendra Singh and his wife Poolan Devi got worried about him. They waited it out for a couple of days, but they somehow had an eerie sense that something was not quite right. Dhirendra was a journalist working for a renowned newspaper called Aaj. The Kumbh Mela, the largest gathering of humans on the planet, was being organized that year. It became the talk of the town that a journalist had suddenly disappeared, and the police was clueless about what had happened. It didn't paint a very good image of the city and its authorities. The police were under added pressure to deliver instant results. They didn't want the pilgrims to think that a criminal was on the loose. Sri Narayan Tripathi, the station house officer of Kitganj police station, was immediately deployed on the case, and he began his investigation. The phone records of Dhirendra were carefully looked into to find out who he was in contact with before his disappearance. In those days, cellular phones were a rarity in India. Not a lot of people owned mobile phones, and the criminals too weren't aware of the technology and didn't know how to use it judiciously without being traced. One of the last registered phone calls was made to a landline number. The landline belonged to a man named Ram Niranjan, aka Raja Kolander, whose wife was from the same village as Dhirendra. Raja Kolander's wife, Poolan Devi, member of the district council, had picked up the police call and told Narayan Tripathi that she lived somewhere near Ramsagar Lake. Virendra, together with the police, went to that address and asked Poolan Devi if her brother, Dhirendra Singh, had visited them. Virendra and his whole family knew Poolan Devi from before. Meanwhile, Officer Tripathi was standing just outside the village on the street when he saw a vehicle approaching him. It was an SUV, a Tata Sumo, and driving it was Raja Kolander. Kolander used to run a gang involved in looting vehicles, but while the people under him might have assisted him for the money, Kolander's darkest intentions were homicidal right from the start. As it turned out, he had shot and finished most of the drivers of these stolen vehicles. The police took him into their custody for further questioning. Kolander's brother-in-law, named Vakshraj, was also present in the SUV with him. They denied every accusation when first asked. Vakshraj was wearing a pair of shoes that looked very expensive, but he said that they were only for a few $100. The police officers became more and more suspicious as the questioning began. Around 3 a.m., a couple of hours before dawn, unbelievably, Raja Kolander proudly confessed that he had killed Dhirendra Singh. Clearly, not something a sane criminal would likely do, right? The police, however, now needed evidence against Kolander because there was always a possibility that he would say the contrary when presented in front of the magistrate or the lower courts. Raja Kolander had worked as a Grade 4 employee at the Central Ordnance Depot in Shioki. However, it was clear his pay and his lifestyle didn't align. He had a piggery farm and a couple of four-wheelers, which made it very clear that the man was not earning solely from his official job. The police would later also take his entire family under their custody for questioning. Raja Kolander turned out had a lot of illicit and illegal side businesses. He was scared that Dhirendra Singh, being a journalist, would expose him. So he decided to plot his murder to take place at his piggery farm. The killing of Dhirendra Singh was a collaborative event, and he recruited his brother-in-law, Vakshraj Kaul, to assist in the killing. Kolander lured Singh into his farmhouse on that December night, with the two talking around a fire. Soon, brother-in-law Vakshraj Kaul arrived at the scene, sneaked up on them, and coldly shot the journalist in the back with a Desi Kata, a gun. Raja then brutally mutilated the body of Dhirendra Singh, and together they dumped the remains at Rewa, Madhya Pradesh, some 130 kilometers from Kolander's Naini farmhouse. The Tata Sumo stolen from a murdered youth in Raebareli was the getaway vehicle. Singh's severed head was later found in Bansagar Lake. After some further questioning, they were finally able to recover most of the different parts of Dhirendra's body and also his blood-smeared clothes. This proved that Kolander's mind was in a clear state and his memories were vivid enough to recall all of his dumping grounds. The journalist fraternity of the city insisted that Dhirendra's head should be cremated in Prayagraj as a symbol of protest. Virendra Singh couldn't believe that his brother had been murdered and subjected to such a horrifying and gruesome death. Dhirendra's wife was pregnant during that time, and as fate would have it, she would be caught in an accident of her own and died a few years after her husband was killed. Raja Kolander, on the other hand, unbelievably, assisted the police in their investigation, as if he had nothing to hide, as if he was proud of his diabolical killings. The police officers went to recover the murder weapon, a country-made pistol from his piggery farm. It was at this time that coincidentally they found a red-coloured diary on which it was written Raja's diary. What came next had them shocked beyond imagination after reading what was in it. There were 14 names that were written there, and the last name was that of Dhirendra Singh. What was written in graphic detail was his cannibalistic rituals that he had supposedly carried out on his victims. It was like something out of Silence of the Lambs. He specifically wanted to cook and consume the brains of his victims. Once the juice was out of the skull, Kolander would then proceed to talk to the skulls, which he would later keep as trophies. Most of the body parts of his victims were dumped in his farmhouse and nearby areas. It was mostly the skull that fascinated him. Just take the case of his first victim, Kalisharan Srivastava, a fellow worker at the ordnance factory. Srivastava fascinated Kolander, for he identified with the Kayastha caste. The upper caste, urban-oriented Kayastathas have historically had the benefits of access to formal education and held administrative positions such as accountants, record keepers, and scribes. For Kolander, a Kayastha man would have immense grey matter, meaning a high intellect and intelligence, and that is why Kolander feasted on the brain soup of Srivastava. While there was no clear evidence if Kolander indulged in any cult-like rituals, he clearly had a strange obsession with the skulls of his victims. Kolander would surround himself with these skulls and hold an adalat, a court hearing, of his own. A god complex is quite common in the behavior of serial killers, and maybe Raja Kolander felt a similar high whilst looking down on his cranial trophies. If the personal conversations with skulls weren't enough, Kolander would later decorate by painting the skulls and hanging them by a thread on the branches of a tree outside his Naini farmhouse. How no neighbours or visitors to the Raja farmhouse would see these hanging skulls remains a mystery. The police knew then and there that by accident or not they had caught a potential serial cannibal killer who had been able to beguile the system and operate from the shadows. In order to understand Kolander's motivations and intentions, it is necessary to take a look at the socio-political environment of that time. Kolander belonged to a tribe named Kol. He was seeing that a lot of political parties were now fighting for the rights of castes that were oppressed and didn't have any sort of representation in the state legislature and the parliament. There was a wave of change, and Kolander too wanted to be a part of it. He dreamt of making it big as a politician and climbing up the ladder of the food chain. Dr. Raja Mitra, a clinical psychologist, and Bhadra Narayan, an anthropologist who had reviewed the case, had their own theories and analysis as to why Ram Nirajan changed his name to Raja Kolander and committed those heinous crimes. Kolander lived his life in metaphors. Behind each metaphor, there was a desire that he wanted to fulfill. When he bought an SUV, he didn't buy it because he liked the specifications, but in those days, the car was like a symbol of power. Generally, a lot of politicians and power brokers owned it. Kolander often lent money to people, not because he wanted to earn interest, but because he wanted to have that sense of being in a superior position as compared to someone else. Raja Mitra says that after studying his behavioral patterns, he could assess that the man was probably suffering from antisocial personality disorder. Kolander never fought with anybody, and he would never enter into any arguments. Who would have guessed that? In his own imaginary narrative, Raja Kolander considered himself to be a victim. He was a self-proclaimed emperor, almost godlike, who was not a criminal, but a revolutionary. He had named his children Andalan, Adalat, and Jamanat, which, if translated into English, meant revolution, court of law, and bail, respectively. Incredibly, he had also changed the name of his wife so that she could sound more authoritative. Now, this was not something that you saw very often. In his own narrative, he believed that he was a crusader and the leader of his tribe. He had no respect for the criminal justice system. He was devoid of any empathy, and somewhere also believed that by killing the people, he was doing them a favor. He felt that his actions were restoring the balance of society and also uplifting the downtrodden. Conversely, according to his children, he was not the kind of man who would even lift a finger, let alone kill somebody in cold blood. Obviously, a lot of times there was a conflict between reality and his own imaginary world, and that's when he used to get restless. He had changed his name to Raja Kolander only because it gave him a sense of authority. Ram Niranjan as a name didn't sound too strong and impactful. He also wanted to be seen as the king of his own tribe. Raja did everything in his power to achieve that. In the aftermath, according to Raja Kolander, he changed his story and he never killed those people. Such varied testimonies only further confirms the psychopathic mindset of Raja Kolander, who may not have been able to differentiate between fiction and true life. He claimed that he was framed by the police because they just wanted a scapegoat. He said that a few names, whom the police had told to be his victims, were still alive. He said that the media trial had created a public perception that was not only flawed but also undemocratic. Maybe Raja Kolander was a delusional man and he created these fictitious theories inside his own mind, which he actually believed to be true. But there is a possibility that he might have known what was right and what was not, but was very slyly trying to hide the facts. His testimonies clearly had a lot of discrepancies as compared to the accounts of his children, relatives and friends. For a moment, if you heard him talk independently, without knowing the background, you might believe him too. He spoke with a lot of conviction and had a way with words.
जो चुनाव जीतने पर विरोधियों ने फंसाया है, न उसका फिंगरप्रिंट हुआ है, न उसका डीएनए टेस्ट हुआ है, किसका है खोपड़ी ये भी तो दिखाएंगे.
He had killed one man just so that he could drink the stock made from his brain and take over his psychic abilities, which he professed to have. Now there was a different side to the story too. The tribe Kol had been subjected to a lot of oppression and injustice over the years. There was a stereotypical image that people had of them. The consumption of alcohol and eating non-vegetarian food were customary for them. People had a perception that when this tribe used to stay in the jungles, they used to consume human meat. This was a mere assumption and may have played a crucial role in making Raja Kolander a man-eater in the public eye. But even if he wasn't a man-eater, one thing was for sure, he was not telling the truth. In the end, the courts couldn't find enough evidence to prove the fact that Kolander practiced cannibalism. The skeleton remains of a few victims were found buried in his piggery farm, and as mentioned earlier, Dhirendra Singh's body was also recovered by the police officials. Kolander had told the police that the SUV he had in his possession was also stolen. He had killed the driver and conductor, Manoj Singh and Ravi Srivastava. Even though Kolander was arrested in 2001, it took more than a decade for him to be charged with the murder of Dhirendra Singh. Even though skulls and bones were recovered from his farmhouse, he could never be charged with the killings, despite the confessional narratives in his diary as evidence. However, justice was served when finally, in November 2012, Raja Kolander, along with Vashraj Kol, was sentenced for life with Dhirendra Singh's murder being classified as a rarest of rare case. They were initially jailed in Naini, followed by a stint in Lucknow. Currently, the two are serving their sentences in a jail in Unnao. The only question that remains is how many victims did Raja Kolander kill and consume in totality, and were the 14 depicted in his journal a true recollection of what really happened. Thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel and come back for more gruesome crimes that shook the world.